Hi, I'm Kara, and I have a confession to make. This is very hard for me to talk about. You see, I did a terrible thing, something that almost cost the life of the person I care about the most. My 5-year-old sister disappeared because of me. I beg you not to judge me before you listen to the whole story, though, because it's really not that simple. Let me explain things from the start. My little sister Lana is the only person I have in this world. You might wonder why. Well, the rest of my family is gone. We used to have the most amazing mother, but she passed away. Yeah, that's right. 5 years ago, we lost our mother after Lana was born. Her surgical delivery of Lana had a lot of complications because of a stupid medical error that put her in a coma, and 2 weeks later, death stole her from us. Ever since then, it was just the three of us, Lana, my father, and I. You'd think that after a mom's death, my dad would have taken it upon himself to take care of us. However, my dad is not that type of father. I don't know if I even considered him to be much of a father in the first place. He usually spent most of his time at work and expected mom to do the rest, such as cooking, cleaning, taking care of the kids. He believed that raising kids wasn't a man's job. So, after a tragedy, he had no clue how to raise us. But instead of actually making an effort to try, he married another woman who became our stepmother. Apparently, replacing mom with another woman after 2 years seemed like a great idea to him. My little sister, of course, didn't really get what was happening, so she stayed out of it. I, on the other hand, was having a hard time accepting the reality my father had forced upon us. Even though I tried my best to communicate with him, every conversation we had ended in a big fight. I honestly couldn't deal with him. He was a hopeless case. As for the woman he brought into our home, she was even worse than him. The woman was pure evil, just like the typical stepmom in the stories we grew up listening to. She acted like the nicest person in front of our dad. And when he was gone, she was a completely different person. She screamed at us, called us names, told us how worthless we were, and the list went on. I never took anything she said seriously because her opinion never mattered to me. However, I got really aggressive when she went for my little sister. My little sister was so innocent and gentle. She reminded me of my mother a lot. She had a pure heart, and every mean word affected her. Seeing her cry was the thing that hurt me the most in the world. That is why I defended my sister and tried my best to keep our stepmom away from her. But when I couldn't prevent it, I was there to make her feel better. What seemed to cheer her up the most were the stories I told her about her mother. Lana was always curious to know what mom was like. I tried my best to describe her, and I showed her old pictures and videos of our mother. She looked just like Lana. With time, these stories became Lana's favorite topic to talk about. It reminded her that no matter what happened, Mom was watching over us. I also told her stories of how one day we would be okay, because we would run off together to the city and do whatever we wanted. I promised her that we'd run off to Disneyland together, and her big eyes sparkled like diamonds. I showed her Disneyland pictures and videos, and I asked her to close her eyes and imagine us there. Little things like these were the only tool I had to cheer up my sister. Seeing her fall asleep with a smile on her face meant the world to me. After I made sure she was asleep, I would hug her and cry silently all night, holding my breath so I wouldn't wake her up. In the mornings, I would always prepare her breakfast, make sure she ate, and walk her to school before I headed to mine. Even though my sister was only 5 years old, she was pretty smart. She kept a smile on her face because she knew that it upset me to see her sad. Deep down, I knew she wasn't happy. Lana deserved a much better life than this. One day, I had to stay late at school. I was trying to finish a project and time flew by. I hated arriving home late because I worried about Lana being alone with my wicked stepmother. And my concerns were legitimate because as soon as I opened the door, I could hear my stepmother yelling at my sister. I stormed into the kitchen and I saw Lana cleaning broken glass off the floor. What the heck? My stepmother noticed my presence, so she quickly began excusing this insanity. She declared, "Your dumb sister dropped her plate and she's cleaning up her mistake." "You monster!" I screamed. How could you ask a child to clean up broken glass? I wanted to kill her. I was fuming inside. I imagined myself dragging her by the hair and kicking her out of our house. I was so angry, I even forgot my little sister was there as I was screaming. And before I knew it, I had grabbed a couple of plates from the table and I smashed them on the floor and said, "No, you clean up after your mistake." I looked to my right and Lana was standing in the corner frightened. My eyes filled with tears when I saw how terrified she was. I would have died 1,000 times before scaring my sister like that. I don't know what had come over me. I grabbed her hand and took her upstairs to our room. Lana was shaking and I was too. This time, I couldn't hold back my tears and wait for her to fall asleep. Instead, I hugged her while crying uncontrollably. Lana held me tight and promised she would fix everything. When Dad came upstairs, I refused to come out of my room, and he was raging. Lana kept asking him to kindly leave me alone, but he wouldn't listen. He continued knocking hard on my door and pushing the handle with all his strength until he cracked the door open. He stormed in aggressively, and even though I was used to it by now, I still felt scared. My little sister hurried to protect me. She knew what was coming next. She cried, "Daddy, no, please," but he ignored her shouts and he went ahead and slapped me really hard. 1, 2, 3 times. My face turned red and swollen and I tried to hold back my tears. He demanded that I apologize to my stepmother. I yelled, "No way! I would never apologize." I could take the beating as long as I didn't have to apologize to that evil snake. I closed my eyes expecting another hit, but it never came. When I opened them, Lana was clutching onto his arm with all her strength and crying, "Please, Daddy." He eventually decided to stop and he left the room. I crawled into my bed sobbing. Lana lay beside me. She looked at me with her big eyes, clueless about how to calm me down. But when I relaxed a bit, Lana began telling me tales of how we would run away someday to Disneyland, followed with stories about our mother and the way she watches over us. She was trying to take care of me the way I took care of her. I smiled and held her, and we fell asleep. I woke up the next day feeling sore. I turned over to see Lana, but she wasn't sleeping next to me. I went out of the room to check up on her, but she was nowhere to be found. I started panicking. Where could she be? I stormed into the room I hated the most, and I asked my dad and stepmother where Lana was. They were half asleep and seemed like they couldn't care less, so I kept yelling until I caught their attention. Soon enough, they started looking for her, but to no avail. My dad called the police and reported her missing. Shortly after, the police came to our house. When they questioned us, I couldn't tell them we lived in an abusive house because I didn't want my sister and me to be sent into the broken system of foster care. However, I needed them to find her, so I informed them that I thought my sister might have tried to run off to Disneyland because we had planned it in our imaginations. The police search took place shortly after. I felt so guilty. My sister had gone missing because I had glorified the idea of running away. So she must have thought it was a better alternative to staying in our abusive home. My attempts of trying to protect her ended up hurting her. I rushed out of the house to look for her. After hours of searching, I felt like I was about to collapse. When I found myself 5 minutes away from the graveyard my mom is buried in, I went there because all I needed at that moment was to talk to my mom. I sat next to her grave. I was sobbing. I told my mom that Lana was missing and I needed her help even though I knew she couldn't really help. I mean, my mom was dead. Right at that moment, I felt like I'd lost all hope, but suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a little girl sitting next to a grave, not that far from where I was sitting. I looked closer. Hang on, was that Lana? I got up and started running towards her. Oh my, yes, it was Lana. She ran toward me, and before I knew it, she was in my arms. It's impossible to put into words how I felt at that moment. "What are you doing here, silly?" I asked her. She then pointed at a grave that seemed to have a similar name to Mom's and said, "I'm visiting Mommy." I smiled. I totally forgot my sister was still learning how to read. "This is not Mom's grave," I told her. I took her hand and showed her where our mom was. Lana let go of my hand and sat beside the grave as she started talking to my mother. The sight was just heartbreaking, and her words broke my heart even more. She began saying that she came all the way from home to ask Mom to watch over me. Better this time because I've been hurting. I guess that my little sister truly believed that our mom could protect us, and maybe she was right. In a way, I felt like Mom helped me find Lana after she went missing. After all, we reunited at the place where she rests, and this made me realize we'll always be safe and happy together. How would you describe your relationship with your sister? Tell us more in the comment section below and post your thoughts about this story. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. John and I have been together for 4 years. Our relationship has been perfect until we used a pregnancy test and found out that John was pregnant. During the last year, John started to change. He no longer called me, and he avoided me at school as well. I had to figure out what has been going on with him. So I sent him a message saying, "Did I do something wrong?" And he replied, "Listen, I think that we should put an end to our relationship. If you really cared for me, you would have done the thing that would have made me happy." I wasn't ready to break up with John yet. He treated me well and has always been kind to me. I couldn't imagine my life without him. Without a second thought, I replied to his message. "I will do what you want me to do," and that was it. I can't say that it was the best, but it was okay, I guess. I couldn't really tell. I've never been with anyone else before John. He also managed to convince me that there was absolutely no chance for me to get pregnant on the first time. Our relationship returned back to normal after we did it. I would even say that it became even better. But a month later, my period was late and I panicked. I called John and told him that I was pregnant. I couldn't find any other logical explanation for what was happening. But he only laughed and said that I was blowing the situation out of proportion and told me that he would buy me a pregnancy test and drop by. I agreed to a suggestion only on one condition. I told him he must bring 2 tests, not 1. When John arrived, I had absolutely no idea how to use a pregnancy test. I grabbed one of the tests and handed it to John and said, "Okay, you first." He looked at me and smiled and said, "Hey, pretty face. It seems that you've got the wrong idea. You're the one that has to pee over it, not me." It sounded like complete madness to me. All I wanted to know was if there was a baby in my uterus or not. John noticed how hesitant I was, so he grabbed the pregnancy test and went to the bathroom. A few minutes later, he came out with a look of confusion all over his face. He was hiding the test behind his back. He didn't want to show me the result he got until I take my turn and use the test as well. It took me some time. When I came out of the bathroom, he looked at my test and laughed. He said, "See, you're not pregnant. Your period must have been a little late, that's all." Yes, these kinds of things happen from time to time, but why was he hiding his test? And why did he look confused when he saw it? I took the chance when he wasn't looking and stole his test. And what I discovered left me speechless. My test came negative, while his turned out to be positive. How could it be? How could John be pregnant? Didn't he just tell me that pregnancy test was meant to be used by females only? Oh my God. Did that mean my test was inaccurate? I panicked all over again. But John, trying to calm me down, told me that we could simply buy some more of those tests and try again. Oh God. But what other option did I have? John went to the pharmacy and returned with more of those test sticks, a big bottle of water, and 4 Coca-Cola cans. Because, as you probably know, we needed them so that we could go to the bathroom. We tried more than 20 test sticks. Every single one of mine came out negative, while every test stick that John used came out positive. Despite the situation being disgusting, I mean, it had to be, all that urine, ew, it was still funny. I looked at John and said, "Could it be that you are pregnant with my child?" And we both broke into laughter. John even took a selfie with the dozens of positive pregnancy tests that he had. He then posted the photo to his Instagram account with the caption that said, "It looks like I don't need a partner to be a dad. Yes, all these positive tests are mine." We spent the whole night reading comments and laughing, and most importantly, I finally got my period that night. On the next day at school, everyone gathered around us and asked, "Is it true that all those positive pregnancy tests were John's, or is it just a silly joke?" But John answered with pride. Yes, they are all mine. Knowing that everyone in school knew that John and I had sex still made me feel uncomfortable. It should have been a private experience that no one else but me and John should have known about. A few days after we had posted the photo, the cheerleading team leader approached me and informed me that the team had decided to cut me off as they believed that it was not right to keep me in the team while I was pregnant. They believed that my belly would eventually get bigger and I would look ridiculous dancing with my big belly and short skirt all at once. They would definitely be ashamed of me for that. I tried once and again to convince her that I wasn't pregnant, but she insisted that no one believed John's lie, and that was it. As you can probably see, my life took a turn for the worse. While John was enjoying his unrivaled popularity due to his wittiness, I was witnessing my life falling apart, one piece after another. More than 2 months passed by while I refused to speak to John. Even though I was the one who encouraged him to post the photo in the first place, I still blamed him for all that happened. At first, John did not care that much about speaking to me again. He even got himself a new girlfriend. However, during the last week, he started calling and texting me once again on a daily basis, but I never returned any of his calls or messages. I felt extremely mad at him. During gym class, John approached the gym teacher and told him that he will not be able to continue the class as he was feeling pain in his lower abdomen, but the teacher only looked at him in ridicule and said, "First, your pregnancy test comes back positive, and now you're having your period. What is next? Will you grow a pair of breasts next?" Poor John felt extremely embarrassed and everyone distanced themselves from John. No one wanted to be friends with the guy who was slowly turning into a girl, but for me, I felt very sorry for him. I went to him and said, "Listen, you don't have to attract everyone's attention to be seen as an interesting person. You once were perfect in everyone's eyes. I wish you would stop acting weird and that you would return back to your old self." He started to cry out loud and said, "No one wants to believe me, even you." At that moment, the mean cheerleading team leader approached us and said, "Hey, look at that. It seems that our hormones are confused. Please be kind to Mrs. John, that loser." She really stepped on my last nerve with her uncalled for comment. I jumped on her and started pulling her hair, but the coach held me and pulled us apart. He ordered us to go to the principal's office. On our way to the principal's office, I looked at my palm and saw a strand of her hair still stuck between my fingers, while John held tightly onto my other hand. I didn't want to leave his hand. I really felt like there was something going on with him. While we waited to be called into the principal's office, John looked at me and apologized for what had happened to me because of him. He was very upset because he made me choose between ending our relationship or having sex with him. He even told me that he was thankful for me because I stood up for him and it meant a lot to him. For a second, I thought that he was going to tell me that he was willing to give our relationship a second chance. And honestly, I was willing to do so in a heartbeat as well. But his new girlfriend walked in and ruined everything. Once she saw him, she jumped on him and they both shared a long, warm kiss. He didn't seem to mind one bit. Once again, I couldn't stay calm. It was too much for me to bear. I pushed her away from him and kicked him in the nuts. He screamed his lungs out and fell unconscious. A few seconds went by, and he was being carried to the ambulance that took him to the hospital. I was in knee-deep problems. I thought that final incident would definitely get me grounded for life. Over the course of the next few days, John was no longer to be seen around school, and I didn't hear anything about him. I know that I might look stupid to you, but I was worried about him anyways. I felt that I had caused him some serious problem when I kicked him, but I honestly never thought that my kick was that strong. I had to check on him, but how would I do so? His phone was off all the time. There was no other way. I had to go to his new girlfriend and ask her about him. When I asked her about John, she told me, "That fool broke up with me and I don't care what happens to him. He can go to hell." My back was to the wall. I had no other way to check on John than to go visit him at his home. And that was what I did. When I visited him, he looked even worse than ever. However, he was thrilled to see me and told me that kicking him in the balls was the best thing that has ever happened to him, and that if I hadn't kicked him in the balls, he would have been doomed for sure. Despite that, he told me that he was totally desperate. He had lost his testicles for good. everything finally started to make sense. John's pregnancy tests were indeed positive, but that wasn't because the tests were bad. It was because John was suffering from testicular cancer. The pains he had been suffering from weren't made up by him so that he could get more attention from people around him. They were very real. Testicular cancer? That must be the worst thing that could ever happen to any guy. What started as a joke ended as a disaster. Not only that, but also the only way of treatment for his case was the complete amputation of his testicles. I promised myself that day that I will never let John face all that on his own. Despite the fact that he had left me all alone before, this was totally different. I was with him when he went to surgery to get his testicles removed. All of that worked in our favor. With his testicles removed, there was no way at all that he would get me pregnant. He feels that our relationship has become perfect and stress-free.